Namaskar, this is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Our top story tonight is about an Indian company, a unicorn. It was once everywhere in India, from the cricket team's jersey to billboards to television ads. But as they say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. I'm talking about Byju's. The company was once the poster child of Indian startups. Today, it's a cautionary tale. Every day, there is more bad news for them. Even the founder, Baiju Ravindran, is unable to handle it. In the month of April, as Indian officials raided his offices, Baiju was sobbing on the phone apparently, trying to defend his company to investors. Tonight, we get you the story of Byju's, its fall and what it means for the industry. Also, another Quran has been burnt in Europe. Are minorities safe anymore in the continent? India is plotting a power play, quite literally. New Delhi wants to supply electricity to Southeast Asia. Stay tuned to find out how. After Donald Trump, is Joe Biden going to be impeached? The Republicans are talking about it. And should schools be banning smartphones? The United Nations says yes, they should. We'll talk about all of that and more. But first, the headlines. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu in North Korea for a rare visit. He called Pyongyang a quote-unquote very important partner. North Korea is hosting Chinese and Russian delegations for the Korean War anniversary celebrations. This is the first such event since the pandemic. Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen will step down after 4 decades. He is one of the world's longest-serving leaders. He will resign and hand over power to his son, Hun Manet. The Indian economy continues to grow strong. The IMF or the International Monetary Fund upgrades India's GDP growth forecast to 6.1%. India accounts for 1/6 of the global growth this year. Prime Minister Narendra Modi faces a no-confidence motion in Parliament. The motion is backed by an opposition alliance of more than 24 parties. This is the first no-trust vote in the lower chamber of the House, the Lok Sabha, in 20 years. Mediterranean nations continue to fight extreme heat and deadly wildfires. In Greece, thousands were evacuated as tourist islands struggled to control the blaze. Wildfires also flared in parts of Croatia and Italy. Does TikTok want to sell made-in-China goods to Americans? Reports say the app is launching an e-commerce business in the US. It wants to take on popular shopping platforms like Shein. And the countdown begins for the 2024 Summer Olympics. The Olympic torch was revealed today on the River Seine. Paris is hosting the Summer Games next year. Our lead story tonight is about Byju's, one of India's most celebrated unicorns. Today, it is a startup engulfed in a crisis. Byju's is huge in education. It's a household name in India. The company became so big that they signed Messi last year. That's right, the footballer Lionel Messi. He's a global ambassador of Byju's. He was hired last year. You may already know this. But here's what you may not know. Right before Byju's announced the Messi deal, they sacked some 2,500 employees. The company was worried about its budget. It wanted to cut costs. So they let go of 2,500 employees, and just days after handing the pink slips, as if to rub salt in the wounds, Byju's announced the Messi deal. This happened at a time when investors were building pressure on the company. The company was losing money. It had reported a revenue loss of more than $54 million. There were calls to slash cost. And how did Byju's respond? By spending more money. They splurged on ad films with Messi. It was a tone-deaf move. And all these months later, it seems like Byju's still hasn't got its act together. Recently, a video went viral, apparently featuring a Byju's employee. She was recorded shouting at her seniors. Watch this.
He's not a president, he's not a vice president. Sir, we came from JEE campaign, from K12 segment, right? हमें यहाँ पे वर्ड मिला कि हम यहाँ पे काम करेंगे तो हमें मीन्स हमें सर्वाइव करने का मौका मिलेगा. बट वी आर फ्रॉम स्टार्टिंग हम नहीं काम करना चाहते थे, हम बोले कि हमसे काम नहीं होगा यहाँ, बट स्टिल वी आर नॉट गेटिंग एनी सपोर्ट. हमें अमितेश सर से कम्युनिटी सपोर्ट मिला. Yes.
Want to have a conversation? Come.
No, sir.
Please.
I will not come in cabin. I will come confront in here itself. मुझे यहाँ पे
What was she complaining about? Lack of incentives and support and a toxic work culture. The messy affair sums up what's wrong with Byju's and perhaps with a lot of other Indian startups. You see, there was a time when they were flush with cash, valuations were skyrocketing, raising money was easy, so the startups spent beyond their means. And they did so without showing any real profits. Now they're all getting a reality check. And this is what our lead story is about tonight. We'll start with Byju's. It is in deep trouble. Our viewers in India may have heard about it. If you haven't, here's a quick primer. Starting with Byju's. What is Byju's? It's a household name in online education, or what they call ed tech, education technology. At one point, it was called the world's largest ed tech company. At its peak, it had some 100 million students. But today, Byju seems to be struggling to survive. It's been making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Look at the latest one. There are allegations of foreign exchange violations. Byju's is being probed for this. In the month of April, the company was raided. Laptops were seized from the Byju's office in Bengaluru. And where was their chief executive? His name is Baiju Ravindran. Reports say he was sitting in Dubai, trying to save a fundraising deal. $1 billion were on the line, but the investors were nervous. Baiju Ravindran tried to assure them. He's said to have broken down during the call. The assurances were not working, it seems. You see, Byju's faces a lot of legal trouble as well, not just in India, but overseas too. Lawsuits have been filed in America. There is a fight going on between Byju's and its American creditors. The creditors say the company is hiding cash. How much? At least $500 million. The creditors also say that Byju's defaulted on a loan, but they had the money to pay. And what is Byju's defense? It says the allegations are incorrect. So the court battle continues, but there is more to it than bad loans. This year, the company's auditor Deloitte also quit. Why did they resign? Deloitte was concerned about Byju's financials. It had asked for some statements, but it was not given those statements. The crisis snowballed. Then 3 independent directors stepped down. The company said this was a planned transition, but last month another director quit. His name is Russell Driesenstock. He represents Process Envy, one of the early investors in Byju's. This week they spoke out. Why did they give up the board seat? Listen to their response. I'm quoting, executive leadership at Byju's regularly disregarded advice and recommendations relating to strategic, operational, legal and corporate governance matters. So they've clearly lost trust. And the impact is showing on Byju's financial health. Today, it is valued at more than $5 billion, and $5 billion may sound like a lot of money. But last year, Byju's was worth a whopping $22 billion. So this is a drop from $22 billion to $5. It's a loss of more than 70%. Today, Byju's is just a shadow of what it once was. Fresh layoffs have been ordered. Reports say anywhere between 500 and 1,000 employees have been let go of. A few days ago, Byju's gave up its largest office space in Bengaluru. So there's clearly an effort to slash cost. And that's the story of most startups. 2022 was a turbulent year for them. I have some data. Last year, more than 2,400 startups shut shop in India, 2,400 companies. And some 25,000 workers lost their job. This year could be worse. We are still in the month of July, and close to 11,000 startup employees have already been laid off. What do you think is the reason behind this? The money has dried up. Startups are not getting cash. There is a funding squeeze. In the first quarter of 2023, startups in India raised just $2 billion. Funding has dropped by 75% from last year. And this lack of money is exposing the weaknesses in their business models. Because investors now want to see profitability. They're no longer relying on just valuations. They want to see sound balance sheets. So startups are in a rush to fix their books. They want to show how they can manage expenses. The quickest way to do that is to slash jobs, to fire employees. But is that the right way? Is that the best way? Indian startups were once hailed for their innovation. They were a success story. Today, they've become a case study for management students, a lesson on how organizations should not be run. Byju's was once a poster child of Indian startups. Today, it's a cautionary tale. On to Europe now. Another day, another Quran burnt. Once again in Denmark. Copies of the holy book were torched outside 2 embassies in Europe, those of Egypt and Turkey in Denmark. The same thing happened on Monday and Friday as well. So that's 5 days and 4 incidents. We've talked about why this is happening. We've also explained who is behind it. But tonight we're asking a more fundamental question. Are minorities safe in Europe? That's our question. Are they and their culture under attack? We ask this because no one in the West will. They will not ask this question. For them, the idea of discrimination in Europe is just impossible. It's like the sun rising in the West. But if you look closer, you will see problems, a gradual and systemic attempt to target minorities, especially Arab and African Muslims. We can divide these attempts into 2 parts. One is institutional discrimination, things done by the government. The second is hate crimes and xenophobia. Let's look at the first part. Government attempts began in the late 2000s. This was after the 2008 financial crisis. New populist leaders appeared across Europe. Soon, the targeting began. In 2009, Switzerland announced a controversial move. They banned minarets on mosques. 57% of Swiss voters supported this decision. The United Nations called it discriminatory. Rights agencies said that this reflects rising intolerance, but the Swiss did not care. Even Western media jumped to defend it. Look at what the Huffington Post had to say about this. I'm quoting, "Many Swiss are worried about the rise of political Islam, which is threatening hard-won rights such as equal rights for women and men." Political Islam is definitely a problem, but Switzerland sure had a weird way of tackling it. And this soon became a trend. Instead of tackling Islamist extremism, Europe targeted Islam. In 2011, Belgium banned the burqa. They said you can't wear it anywhere in public. The matter went to the European Court of Rights, and guess what happened? They said the ban is fine. Today, around 12 European countries have such laws. The burqa is fully or partially banned. The list of countries includes France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Denmark, and Switzerland, the so-called havens of freedoms and choice. In 2014, Austria introduced a new law. They wanted to create an Austrian version of Islam. How would they do that? By switching languages. Austria said all Muslim clerics must speak in German. Plus, only the German translation of the Quran can be used, no Arabic ones. Does this apply to other religions? Absolutely not. The Bible can be used and read in any language. Some countries went beyond regulation. They shut down mosques. France passed a so-called anti-separatism bill in 2021. It kicked off a series of raids. Around 89 mosques were inspected. More than 20 of them have been shut down. On what grounds? That the French will not say. Their interior ministry claims they were promoting radicalism. And the evidence? It's apparently secretive. These are all policies adopted against radical Islam, but it's also throttling the minority. It's being seen as an all-out assault on Islamic culture. When the government does this, the people catch on, which brings us to the second part of the problem, hate crimes and xenophobia. We'll start with the numbers. In 2017, a survey found that 33% Muslims in Europe experienced discrimination, 33%. That's 1 in 3. 27% experienced racist crimes. So if you ask 4 European Muslims, 1 of them has been affected. Mosque attacks are another problem. Germany has reported 800 mosque attacks since 2014. 800. 150 of them in 2020 alone. Now for some context, the country only has some 2,000 mosques. It's even worse in the UK. Around 42% of the mosques in the UK have been attacked. This report came out in 2022. It only covers the last 4 years. If you go even further back, I'm sure more cases will emerge. You can see this bias in everyday life, in things like policing and court cases. Just look at the riots in France last month. They were triggered by the killing of an Arab Muslim teenager. What was his crime? Fleeing from a traffic stop, that's all. He died for it. Would this have happened to white French citizens? I think we all know the answer. In France, around 10% of the population is Muslim, but in the prison population, it's the opposite. Around 60% of French inmates are Muslim. Germany has a similar problem. Around 20% of their prison inmates are Muslim, but only 6% of the general population is Muslim. So let's recap the last 4 minutes. You cannot wear a burqa in most of Europe. Your mosque cannot have a minaret in Switzerland. Plus, they can be raided and shut down in France. Your imam must speak German in Austria. You also have more chances of ending up in jail. Does this sound like equality and separatism to you? To me, it sounds like persecution. And don't think persecution comes only in one size. It's not always ethnic cleansing, or burning down mosques, or putting Muslims in labor camps. Those are extreme forms of persecution. Europe is practicing a lighter version of it. They pretend to be liberal and secular. They preach to the whole world about tolerance. But what are they doing at home? Diluting their religious minorities, turning them into so-called European version of Muslims. And for what? Some concerns they have about Islamization. Let me explain. We told you about what Belgium did. They banned the burqa in 2011. Now you must think that the streets of Brussels are filled with women in head coverings. Well, think again. Only 270 women in the country used to wear a burqa. 270. All this outrage was over 270 women in an entire country. Same with Switzerland's ban on minarets. They announced a decision in 2009. It was a Swiss skyline filled with Persian minarets. Far from it. Just 4 mosques had them. And I'm not saying that Europe does not have a problem. They do have terror attacks. There is also growing radicalism. But Europe's response is all over the place. It's about time we call them out. Because these Quran burnings are not some sudden or rare trend. They are the result of Europe's years-long policy. And now let's talk about India. New Delhi is working on a bold plan, one that could supercharge India's Act East policy. So what's the idea? India wants to supply electricity to Southeast Asia. The plan is still in the early stages. The goal is to trade power. And how will this work? India will supply electricity. The region will be connected with power grids. Power lines will be built both on land and under the sea. There will be 2 hubs for distribution, Myanmar and Thailand. The power lines and grid linkages will take 4 years to complete. The talks have begun. Reports say India has held discussions at G20 meetings. Why bring this up at G20? Because it is the ideal forum to seek funding and investment for this. And which countries has India spoken to so far? Reports say discussions have happened with Singapore, Malaysia, Myanmar, Indonesia and Thailand. Like I said before, the exact plan is yet to be firmed up. These are still early days, but the idea isn't a far-fetched one. India already supplies electricity to some neighbors like Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan and Myanmar. But this supply is relatively small. The aim is to expand this to cover the entire Southeast Asia region. Will this idea find takers though? New Delhi is said to be hopeful. The region needs a reliable partner. Earlier, ASEAN nations had mooted a different idea. ASEAN, as you would know, is a regional grouping. 10 Southeast Asian countries are members. Now, they have been discussing a regional power grid, but the idea never really took off. Progress has been limited to just bilateral agreements. There is no regional power grid, no framework to supply to the region as a whole. And why is that? Because these projects are difficult to execute. Setting up grids and power lines is an expensive affair, plus there are transmission costs. I'm talking about the cost of sending power from one place to another. It can be a significant financial burden. So you need a partner with some heft to see this through. And India could be that partner. The answer to Southeast Asia's power woes. But should India go down this route? Should it focus on supplying power overseas when it faces shortages at home? This year, demand for power has shot up in India, and so have shortages. Last month, in the month of June, the average daily shortage was more than 4 gigawatts. For context, in 2022, this number was around 1.5 gigawatts. So the shortages have more than doubled. And 2022 was particularly bad. There was stress on India's power grids. During the months of April and May, India experienced its worst outages in more than 6 years. And remember, India is a developing country, so its power needs will only grow every year. How then will India strike a balance between meeting domestic demand and supplying electricity overseas? Well, there is a plan, we are told. India plans to boost production to increase the supply from renewables and big hydropower stations. Right now, India gets 177 gigawatts worth of power from these sources. By 2030, this is expected to increase to 500 gigawatts. Plus more sources are being added. For example, India is engaged in talks with the UAE. There is a proposal on renewable energy. The plan is to connect the UAE's power grid with India's. If that happens, India and the UAE will be able to exchange power. And how does that work? Through undersea cables. Similar discussions are going on with Saudi Arabia too. Perhaps that's why India feels confident about expanding its supply to Southeast Asia. And of course, it makes diplomatic sense. Such a project, it makes strategic sense also. Such a project will establish India as a key regional player, a major hub for electricity. It will create interdependencies. It will deepen India's ties with Southeast Asia. It is also an effective strategy to counter China. Beijing has made deep inroads in the region. If India can increase its presence, it will keep the dragon in check. And some cricket news now. India's women's team captain Harmanpreet Kaur is in the spotlight. I'm afraid not for the right reasons. Her actions in Bangladesh have triggered an online debate. She's also been suspended by the ICC, that's the International Cricket Council. Harmanpreet will now miss 2 international matches plus a 50% match fee fine. But what exactly did she do? Let me tell you the backstory. Team India had travelled to Bangladesh for a series. We played 3 one-day internationals. Bangladesh won the first, India won the second, and the third was tied. But Harmanpreet was not happy. India was on course to win the third match, but towards the end, we lost a cluster of wickets. And one of those wickets was Harmanpreet. She was given leg before wicket, LBW, by the umpire. Harmanpreet disagreed with that decision. She smashed the stumps in disgust. That was strike 1. Strike 2 came during the post-match presentation. Harmanpreet called the standard of umpiring pathetic. She also passed a sarcastic jibe while receiving the trophy. Harmanpreet said, "The umpires tied the match for you, so call them for the photo as well." No point arguing about it. It was a low blow, what she said and what she did. But the internet is divided. One side is supporting Harmanpreet's actions. They say it's all about passion and aggression. The other side disagrees. They say it sends a bad message to viewers, especially to young kids. Women's cricket is making giant strides right now. It's an inspiration for young girls and boys around the world. Would you want them to see such behavior? I'm guessing not. At the same time, it's hard to ignore the double standards here. Commentators have different yardsticks for men and women. Male athletes are expected to be aggressive, and female athletes, well, not so much. When they display emotions or aggression, it's frowned upon. Serena Williams experienced it multiple times. She's been called intimidating and manly. She's also been compared to animals. Same with Martina Navratilova, another tennis icon. Look at how this website described her. A gal with manly arms. And it's not just about aggression. Any emotion displayed by female athletes is put under a microscope. Meet Gabby Douglas. She's a gymnast from the United States. Guess what she was criticized for? Not cheering hard enough for her teammates. Another example is Lisa Leslie. She used to play in the women's NBA. Commentators found her, quote unquote, difficult. And why is that? Because apparently she was aloof and self-absorbed. Now compare this to how male athletes are treated. Their aggression is not criticized. In fact, it is celebrated. Take Virat Kohli, for example. In his early days, Kohli was famous for his on-field antics. He once showed a middle finger to the crowd in Australia. He has in fact abused multiple times on the field. But what does the media call him? The face of New India. Surely this is a double standard, and we are not defending what Harmanpreet Kaur did. She was captaining Team India. It's an honor that very few people get. She should have handled the situation better. Maybe waited until after the presentation, or used better words. At the same time, we must criticize this online hypocrisy. You can't have different standards for male and female athletes. What's wrong is wrong. Harmanpreet's predecessor summed it up best. Her name is Mithali Raj. She wrote an article about this entire incident. Listen to what she said. It's okay to be aggressive and show emotions to a point, but one shouldn't forget the game is above individuals. While Harman's anguish is understandable, her behavior shouldn't be condoned. You can't play sports without passion, maybe even aggression. But aggression doesn't mean insulting your opponents or lashing out at umpires. It can be controlled, directed, and effective. Now let's talk about impeachment. It was a term many hadn't heard of before 2016. For the US Congress, it was like the forbidden word, much like saying Voldemort in Hogwarts. But that changed in the Trump era. Donald Trump was impeached not once but twice. And that set a dangerous precedent. It set the stage for a political battle. Except this time, it is the Republicans who are waging it. US Speaker Kevin McCarthy sounded a warning today. He said he could launch an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. It is linked to allegations of financial misconduct by the president and his son Hunter Biden. The White House has rubbished these claims, but the Republicans look determined. So is an impeachment looming over Joe Biden? Our next report tells you.
The impeachment extravaganza is back in the US. This time, all eyes are on President Joe Biden. So what did Biden do? Well, there are allegations of financial misconduct, all linked to his son, Hunter Biden. Now, these allegations were always there, but a new testimony by Hunter Biden's ex-business partner has raised some eyebrows. Reports say Biden was on the call during some of his son's business deals. Basically, Hunter Biden rung Joe Biden and sometimes even put him on the speaker during business dealings. All of this apparently happened when Biden was vice president. The claims sound dubious. So what does the White House have to say? It has rubbished all such claims. The White House says Biden was never in business with his son. But for the Republicans, this is a goldmine, a perfect opportunity to start an impeachment probe. 3 US House committees are currently investigating this. They are looking into any sort of financial misconduct. So if the administration fails to answer them, all bets are off. The Republicans may go ahead with an impeachment inquiry. It's a warning House Speaker Kevin McCarthy gave today. But are the Republicans really serious about an impeachment? They have been reluctant so far. They have chosen low-stakes battles until now, like going after the Attorney General or the Homeland Security Chief. It was easier to sell to the people and the reluctant party members, but this time they're going after the top dog. You see, the Republicans are doing exactly what the Democrats did, using impeachment as a political tool. The impeachment was introduced as a series of checks and balances to prove that no one was bigger than the Constitution, not even the President of the United States. But it has slowly turned into a political tool, a way for one party to humiliate the other. Only 3 US presidents have ever been impeached. It includes the likes of Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump. Trump was the only sitting US president to be impeached twice. but none of them were removed from office. So if Biden's impeachment probe goes ahead, will it be any different? Of course, there'll be a lot of compassionate speeches, clashes in the Congress, even some theatrics. But is that what the United States needs right now? There are mass shootings, rising inflation, curbs on women's rights. America is going through a lot. The last thing it needs is yet another impeachment. But who will explain that to the politicians? They are busy in their political merry-go-round.
I'm so grateful to be here with all of
Now, how much activism is too much activism? It's a question that sums up our times. Activism is supposed to be good. It's supposed to change the world for the better. But sometimes it can do the very opposite. Case in point, what happened in Malaysia. There was a concert in Kuala Lumpur last week. An English band was headlining it. It's this one called the 1975. Midway through the concert, the lead singer had a calling. He decided to turn activist. We're talking about this man, Matty Healy. He began with a 3-minute speech. He slammed Malaysia's anti-LGBTQ policies. We can't play out the speech for you. It will probably be a series of beeps. Basically, it was filled with profanity. After the speech, the singer went a step ahead. He kissed his fellow band member on stage, a male band member. Now remember, this is Malaysia. It's a Muslim majority country. It does not tolerate same-sex relations. Homosexuality can land you in jail for 20 years. So the government was not happy with what the band did. They cancelled the rest of the event. The band was supposed to hold more shows in Indonesia and Taiwan. Those too were cancelled. Matty Healy probably thought, job done. He would be praised by the LGBT community in Malaysia, but he's not being praised. Activists in the country are not happy with the band and what they did. They say, you have said your piece and flown out. We will now have to face the crackdown. Malaysia is the second worst place for transgender people in the world. Almost half of the LGBTQ community has faced harassment. What's worse, it's election season in the country. Politicians have made gender a campaign issue. It's a race to see who can crack down more. In this atmosphere, do you think the ban helped? Well, their actions afterwards have not helped. The lead singer posted this on social media. He said, it's not so easy to stop kissing his fellow band member. So much for activism. Listen to what people in Malaysia are saying. What Matty Healy did, he thought he was doing something for us, but it's giving white savior complex. If he wanted to advocate for queer rights here, he wouldn't just fly off and leave the mess behind. You see, LGBTQ activists are fighting a tough fight. Malaysia's majority is hostile and conservative. They have problematic notions about the LGBTQ community, like they're rude or immoral. And what did they see at the concert? A singer pumped with alcohol, shouting profanity and kissing another man. Chances are those notions will get stronger. The government can turn around and say, we told you so, which makes you wonder, what was the point of this display, of this performative activism? I'm sure the band meant well. Maybe they genuinely wanted to send the right message, but next time, do some research. What if the Malaysian government arrests people who attended the concert? There are videos available on the internet. You can see their faces clearly. Will the 1975 bail these people out? I don't think so. Activism must account for repercussions. Will your actions make things better, or will they put a bigger target on people's backs? In this case, it's the second one. We've seen such thoughtless activism elsewhere too, like some climate activists. They're vandalizing paintings by Picasso, throwing soup at art, even gluing themselves on roads. Most people agree with their messaging and goals, but their methods, not so much. And this does not mean you should stop speaking out for equality or ask questions to governments. When celebrities do it, more people talk about it. So it's absolutely necessary. But choose the right time, place and method. For example, why not donate money from this concert to LGBTQ advocates? I'm sure that would have helped. It's important for celebrities to understand local context and history, to weigh the pros and cons of their actions. But I'm afraid that stars are missing. Nowadays, we're stuck with two kinds. The first group only knows silence. They will endorse Saudi clubs and clothes made from China, Xinjiang. zero concern about rights or freedoms. The other group is trigger happy. They act first and think later. And let me say this, neither group is helping the important causes they claim to espouse. Our next story is from the South American nation of Ecuador, where the president has declared a state of emergency twice in 2 days. This is a nation of about 18 million people. It has been gripped by violence these past few days. It started over the weekend. Riots began in a prison in Ecuador's largest city. 31 people died there. And this is not a first. Ecuador's prisons are breeding grounds for gang violence between rival drug cartels. Deadly battles regularly break out there. In another violent incident, the mayor of the Ecuadorian city of Manta was assassinated on Sunday. It's anarchy in the Andean nation. And the government has asked the armed forces to bring back control. Here's a report.
Soldiers and police officers in Ecuador raided a prison yesterday. The littoral prison in one of Ecuador's largest cities, Guayaquil. Reportedly the most dangerous prison in the country. The armed forces went in to put down a riot that began on Saturday. It had already claimed 18 lives before the military went in. One person had reportedly been beheaded. An emergency was declared by President Guillermo Lasso to deal with the littoral riot. It was the second emergency he had declared in 2 days.
Que quede claro a todos.
Let it be clear to all the terrorists. They will be defeated. Anarchism will have no place in our society. The strength of the state will be felt inside the prisons and on the streets.
By yesterday evening, the death toll had been updated to 31. Visuals were released of prisoners without shirts being tied up. Most had reportedly been without food for 3 days before the armed forces arrived.
Right now we are carrying out the operations. We are controlling the detention center here, and then we will return its administration to the institution that corresponds to it.
The authorities say they seized 9 rifles, 4 pistols, 2 revolvers, 1,000 rounds of ammunition and a grenade launcher. They seized all this from a prison, which is an accurate description of the state of prisons in Ecuador. They've been described as overpopulated torture chambers run by gangs. Prison guards are often corrupt and allow the gangs to conduct their business from within the prisons. And what is their business? Drug trafficking, mostly cocaine. Ecuador was never a cocaine-producing nation, but it has a lot of ports in the Pacific Ocean. Over the years, cocaine from major producers like Colombia and Peru made its way to Ecuador's ports. It was later shipped to the US and other cocaine markets. In the process, drug cartels left their imprint in Ecuador. They co-opted local criminals, and this resulted in the formation of hardened criminal gangs, which now operate all over the country, even from within its prisons. The gangs often clash inside the jails and leave a trail of bodies in their wake. Reports say 420 people have been killed in prison riots since 2021. Often, the victims are beheaded or burnt alive. And the government has not been able to put an end to these barbaric acts. Often, they spread out of the prisons and spill over to the streets, as in the northern city of Esmeraldas. On Monday, 15 prison guards and 2 other staffers were being held hostage at a local jail. The city's police were attacked, explosives were placed at gas stations, and several cars were burned. This came just hours after Ecuador's president had issued the first emergency of the week.
He decretado el estado de excepción.
I have decreed a state of exception in Manabi, Los Rios, and the Duran canton of the province of Guayas. This state of exception will go into effect immediately, and within the articles of the decree, there is a curfew from 10 p.m. until 5 a.m. the following day.
This was over the assassination of a mayor. Agustin Intriago, the mayor of Manta, was killed on Sunday. Manta is a port city that is also used by gangs to ship out drugs. Ecuador's police are still investigating the motive behind the assassination. The president declared an emergency and a curfew, but that isn't enough to stop Ecuador's descent into chaos. The emergencies are band-aid responses that don't address the bigger problems, and the government might not be able to fix things anytime soon. Lasso has said he will not take part in the upcoming election in August. He's on his way out. His successor will have to try and fix the violent mess he's leaving behind. In the 1980s, Ecuador was reportedly known as Isla de Paz, or the Island of Peace. That's compared to its drug cartel-run neighbors Colombia and Peru. Now, the gang violence and drug trafficking seem to be tearing Ecuador apart as well.
And now let's talk about UNESCO. That's the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. And no, they haven't rated national anthems, but they have released their 2023 Technology in Education report, and that report contains a recommendation. They say ban smartphones in schools. That's right, UNESCO is echoing most tenured professors and asking for an end to the phones in classrooms. The UN body has given reasons for wanting to ban phones, but is it practical? Is it even possible anymore? Here's a report.
Have you ever been in the middle of a conversation and the person you're talking to whips out their phone? Some message or notification distracts them and derails the conversation. We're certain that a fair share of parents have faced this troublesome issue. And it seems it has succeeded in ticking off UNESCO as well. We say this because UNESCO has come out with a report. This one's on technology in education. It's basically a recommendation, one that'll bring cheer to teachers' lounges almost everywhere. UNESCO wants smartphones banned in schools. This is the complete statement by UNESCO chief Audrey Azoulay. The highlights are that technology should be used for the well-being of students and teachers, not to their detriment, and online connections are no substitute for human interaction. The director of the report added this. He says we need to teach children to live both with and without technology. And technology should support but never supplant human interactions in teaching and learning. You can almost hear principals around the world popping champagne. It sounds like a vindication of their tireless, thankless efforts to get students to put away their phones. And of course, UNESCO has based its ban recommendation on sound logic. The report shows evidence of learning benefits disappearing if technology is used in excess, or if qualified teachers are not present. For example, just distributing computers to students without getting them a good teacher does not lead to improvements in learning outcomes. Let's face it, the students will find other things to do on the laptop if left unsupervised. And UNESCO also cites how smartphones are a proven distraction from learning, which again seems obvious. But critics of the proposed ban could bring up their own points. For those who graduated in the last 2 decades, imagine education without Google or Wikipedia. Could you have managed your assignments without access to those resources? Think about the pandemic, how video conferencing helped people attend classes from home. So then how can UNESCO consider banning smartphones? The UN organization did think about these things, and it had a response ready. UNESCO says most of the information online is in English, so useful study material is hard to come by for people being educated in other languages. And as for the pandemic, it exposed the gaps between the haves and have-nots. It distorted learning for those without phones or laptops, and so studying remotely should be a last resort. Besides, one doesn't need smartphones for remote learning if they're attending school anyway. So UNESCO's stance is simple. Ban smartphones in classrooms and let the teachers do their jobs. UNESCO feels phones are both a distraction and can lead to other situations that harm a child's development, like cyberbullying. So UNESCO wants the phones out of schools. And a few governments agree with the UN body. In 2018, France had banned phones in school. Finland banned smartphones just this month. The Netherlands also brought in a ban a few days ago. The Dutch ban will come into effect next year, but there will be exceptions for students with medical needs or a disability. But in most countries, the ban hasn't been issued by the government. It's mostly left up to the schools, and the schools do find it hard to impose a complete ban. While a lot of parents agree that phones should be switched off while in class, some are against a ban. That's because parents may want to contact children while they commute. It's one of the positives of a child carrying a phone. But of course, that means some children will inevitably find ways to use the phones during school hours. It's a tough problem to tackle, and smartphones are just the beginning. You already have smart watches, smart glasses could make a comeback, and who knows how many smart AI-powered devices will exist a few years from now. Will you ban all of these things? How on earth will teachers enforce this? It's easy to call for a ban, but much harder to actually execute one. If schools successfully manage, we'll let you know.
In the summer of 1999, India and Pakistan fought their last war, the Kargil War. Pakistan tried to capture Indian military posts. New Delhi hit back, taking control of all the territories. The war went on for 2 months. In the end, India emerged victorious, sending a message to the entire world, a message on how India could defend its borders. 24 years later, as India marks Kargil Vijay Divas, we look at how the war changed India and its military, and what India-Pakistan ties look like 2 decades after the war.
The Kargil War had a lot of firsts and lasts. It was the first war to be fought in the era of satellite TV channels, so emotions were running high. It was also the last war that India and Pakistan fought, one that changed the way the Indian military functions. The war broke out in May 1999. Pakistan made a surprise move. It infiltrated Indian-controlled positions along the LOC, that's the line of control. So Pakistan captured strategic heights in the Kargil, a move that caught India off guard. Pakistan had just conducted its nuclear tests a year before, so they thought India would be scared. Its response would be muted, but they were wrong. What followed was a war that went on for 2 months. In the end, India emerged victorious. We never started the war, but we did end it with a resounding message that India would do anything to defend its borders. 24 years later, the Kargil War serves as a reminder of how far India has come, both militarily and diplomatically. In 1999, the Indian Army suffered at the hands of Pakistani artillery at Kargil. India wanted GPS data of the region, but the US, who controlled GPS then, refused. This later turned into one of India's mega projects, developing its own satellite navigation system. It's called the Navik. It provides India with real-time positioning and timing services. The war forced India to modernize its military infrastructure, to look within. India ramped up border infrastructure, focused on military enhancement, and pushed for more made-in-India defense equipment. The idea was to become self-reliant, to never depend on anyone again. Kargil was the last war India fought with Pakistan. So how have things changed 24 years on? The two countries are still neighbors. No one can change the geography. But are India and Pakistan better neighbors? The two continue to clash over Kashmir. In 2019, relations dipped to an all-time low. A terrorist attack in Pulwama killed 40. India responded with airstrikes in Pakistan's Balakot. Things looked tense. There were murmurs of war. But it never came down to that. In 2022, however, there was some sort of a silver lining. Pakistan was dealing with devastating floods. India offered condolences. This year, Pakistan's foreign minister visited Goa. He was here for an SCO meet. In October, India will host the Pakistan cricket team for the ICC World Cup. The match will take place in Ahmedabad. So where do relations stand right now? India wants better relations with Pakistan, but for that, it must keep terrorism in check. Pakistan, on the other hand, must deal with its internal politics first. Could the two neighbors have better relations? We won't hold our breath for that.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated a new international exhibition cum convention center complex in New Delhi. He flew a drone with a banner that read Bharat Mandapam. In Australia, more than 50 pilot whales died after they were stranded on a remote beach. Experts say the pilot whales in fact form strong bonds. When one gets into difficulty and strands, the rest of them usually follow. And NASA has released an image of what is being called a cosmic necklace nebula. It was formed by sun-like stars. It's located some 15,000 light years away from our planet. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1945, the Potsdam Declaration was signed. Under this, the United States, Britain and China called for Japan's unconditional surrender in the Second World War. They said either comply or face prompt and utter destruction. Japan responded to this ultimatum with no comment. In August that year, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
In the historic conference room at Potsdam, allies have been fulfilled.